So, welcome to the next episode of podcast Deep Talks. My today's guest is Nir Eyal. Hi, and welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
So, Nir is an author of two best-selling books. The first book is Hooked, and the second is Indistractable. So your main focus or your main field of interest is how to be focused, right?
Yes, it's about, I would say it's about habit formation. So Hooked was about how do we build good habits, and Indistractable is about how do we break the bad habits.
Yeah, and we live in 21st century, and I usually say that 21st century is a century of distractions. We are overwhelmed by emails. We are constantly distracted by social media. So how to survive? What are the best tips?
Yeah, so I think, this was certainly a problem for me. That's why I wrote this book. I write books when I have a problem that needs solving. And one of my author friends, Gretchen Rubin, says that research is me search. And so I definitely subscribe to that notion. For me, when it came to distraction, I found that I was so distractible, that I was constantly pulled off track from one reason or another, for one thing or another. I would say I was going to exercise, but I didn't. I would say I was going to eat right, but I wouldn't. I would say I was going to focus at work and do that big project, and somehow I wouldn't do what I said I was going to do. And so I wanted to get to the bottom of it, of why do we do this? Why is it that despite knowing what we should do, why don't we just do it? Because I think, as much as we complain about how crazy the world is these days, the world is also pretty amazing. I mean, it's distraction is not a new problem. In fact, Plato talked about this problem 2,500 years ago, 2,500 years before the iPhone, before Facebook, before 24-hour news. Plato, the philosopher, was saying the world was a very distracting place. He called it akrasia in the Greek, the tendency to do things against our better interest. And back then, you could kind of, for previous generations, you could say, well, people just didn't know what to do, right? If I wanted to get into shape, I didn't know how to do it. Or if I wanted to be more productive at work, I didn't know how to do it. Today, what the heck is our excuse, right? Who doesn't know that chocolate cake is not as healthy as a nice salad? Who doesn't know that if you want to have better relationships, you have to be fully present with people? Who doesn't know that if you want to excel at work, you have to do the work, especially the hard stuff that other people don't want to do? So these days, we know what to do. The problem is not a lack of information. The problem is we keep getting in our own way. Despite knowing what to do, we don't do it. And so that's why I think that the skill of the century is the ability to follow through, the ability to sustain your attention and live according to your values. Because if you don't decide for yourself how you spend your time, how you spend your attention, you will not decide how you spend your life. And in fact, your time and attention will be controlled by somebody else, and your life will be manipulated by somebody else. And so that's why I think these days it is imperative that we learn how to become indistractable, and that we teach our children how to become indistractable. Because, if you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years. It's only going to become more distracting, right? As technology becomes more pervasive and persuasive. If you are looking for distraction, you are going to find it easier and easier than ever. And so it's absolutely imperative that we learn this skill set.
Yeah, and I truly agree with you. And what I think is that our life is very short, and our time is the most valuable resource that we have. So to live to the fullest, to stay focused on what is important, and what you said, to live according to your values, is also my life goal for my whole life. And what do you think? Is it more about using some tools, or is it more about changing your mindset?
I think it's about understanding the strategy to become indistractable. That I think, I think the problem with the self-help industry these days is that a lot of people are looking for the magic bullet. We want to know, give me the life hack, give me the tip, give me the trick, give me the one thing I'm missing. And this stuff fails because what I learned in my 5 years of research is that you have to look at the problem of distraction from a holistic perspective. You have to understand the strategy before you implement the tactics. Tactics are what you do. Strategy is why you do it. So all the life hacks, the tips and tricks, the magic bullets are pointless unless you understand why we get distracted. We have to answer Plato's question. People have been asking this question for 2,500 years, and most of us don't have a clue what the answer is. So let's back up a second. Let's talk about what is distraction. What does that word even mean? Because I didn't understand the meaning of it when I started. So if the best way to understand what distraction is to understand what distraction is not. If you ask most people, what is the opposite of distraction? They'll tell you it's focus, right? Of course, opposite of distraction is focus, except it's not. If you look at the origin of the word, the opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of the word is traction.
Right.
That both words traction and distraction come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And you'll notice both words end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action. So traction, by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, things that you do with intent, things that move you closer to your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. The opposite of traction is distraction. Distraction is any action that pulls you away from what you plan to do, anything that is not in accordance with your values, anything that pulls you away from becoming the kind of person you want to become. So this is really, really important. This isn't just semantics. It really matters. And the reason it matters is that I argue anything can be traction or distraction. Let me give you an example. Before I wrote this book, I would sit down at my desk, and this was my daily routine. I would go to work, and I would sit down at my desk, and I'd say, okay, I have to stop procrastinating. I have to get to work. I'm not going to stop. I have to get to that big project that I've been putting off. Nothing's going to get in my way. No distractions. Here I go. I'm going to start on that big project right now, right away. Here I go. I'm going to get started. Except let me check some email first. Right? Let me just do some to-dos on my to-do list real quick because they're easy and fun to do. Let me just tick those off. And what I didn't realize is that I was succumbing to the most dangerous form of distraction. The most dangerous form of distraction is the kind that tricks you into prioritizing the easy and urgent at the expense of the important. So I would say to myself, oh, email is something I have to do today, right? That's something I said, it's work related, so I'm being productive, right? And what I didn't realize is that that type of distraction is just as harmful as playing a video game or Facebook or whatever, because it's not what I said I was going to do with my time. So anything can be a distraction. And I would say conversely, anything can be traction. So right now it's very fashionable to tell people that technology is the problem, that technology is addicting you. Technology is hijacking your brains. The algorithms are doing all these things to you. And so we shouldn't be on social media. We shouldn't play video games. We should throw away our cell phones. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. This stuff is so blown out of proportion. And believe me, I know every trick in their book because I wrote the book. My first book was called Hook, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. I know how these companies design their products to get you hooked because I wrote the book. And I can tell you, these techniques are good. They're good. They're not that good, right? This is not mind control. We want to believe that we're powerless so that we can blame somebody else, as opposed to realizing that there's nothing wrong with going on Facebook. There's nothing wrong with watching videos on YouTube. There's nothing wrong with playing video games. None of this stuff is bad for you as long as you do it on your schedule, not somebody else's schedule. So the difference between traction and distraction is one word. And that one word is intent, forethought. As long as I plan when I am going to be on social media or play a video game, there's nothing wrong with it. Who says that watching a football game on TV is somehow morally superior to playing a video game? There's no difference as long as you do it on your schedule. So that's the difference between traction and distraction. Now, we have traction, distraction. Now, the two other parts of the model is what prompts us to traction and distraction. Why do we take these actions in the first place? So here we have what we call triggers. We have external triggers. External triggers can lead us toward traction or distraction. These are the usual suspects: the pings, the dings, the rings, everything in our output environment that can lead us towards traction or distraction. But that's not the leading cause of distraction. People like to blame those things, but that in time studies is not the number one reason we get distracted. The number one reason we get distracted is not because of the external triggers. It's not because of the things happening outside of us, but rather what I discovered was that the leading cause of distraction are what we call the internal triggers. You see, most distraction does not begin outside of us. Distraction begins from within. What are internal triggers? Internal triggers are uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape
Mm-hmm.
from. Loneliness, boredom, uncertainty, stress,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, these uncomfortable emotional states, this is the root cause of distraction. And so when we try and put a band-aid on our procrastination and distraction with tips, tricks, and technologies that we think are going to solve the problem, but we haven't addressed this underlying issue of what discomfort are you trying to escape from? That the underlying reason that we procrastinate, the underlying reason we get distracted, it's not a moral failing. There's nothing wrong with you. It's not some kind of broken brain syndrome. It's
Mm-hmm.
simply that most people haven't learned how to deal with these uncomfortable sensations.
Mm-hmm.
And so to escape boredom, uncertainty, stress, fatigue, they do something else. They go on Facebook, they watch television, they watch a sports match on TV to do something else as opposed to to try and escape that uncomfortable sensation. So the answer to Plato's 2,500-year-old question of why do we do things against our better interests is because it's the same reason why we do everything. The reason that human beings do everything is to escape discomfort. And
Mm-hmm.
if we understand that fact, we realize that time management is pain management.
Yeah.
Time management is pain management. If you do not deal with those underlying internal triggers,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much football, too much Facebook, you are going to find something to distract you unless you deal with that internal discomfort first and foremost. Now we have our strategy. Okay. We have
Mm-hmm.
step number one, mastering the internal triggers. Step number two, making time for traction. Step number three, hacking back the external triggers. And finally, the fourth step, preventing distraction with PACT. So now that we have this picture in our mind, internal triggers, internal triggers, external triggers, traction, distraction, we're
Mm-hmm.
basically going to follow the 4 points of this compass. This is how we become indistractable. So that's the strategy. Everything else is tactics.
Yeah. I really like the definition that it's not about time management, it's more about pain management, or what I'm using like emotional management. Because if you have
Yeah.
a negative emotions, then it's much easier to procrastinate. But if you love something, if you love to, I don't know, do a podcast, you don't procrastinate doing podcast. So for
Right.
me, it's very, very important to find a life passion, or find things that you really enjoy doing. So how to be like really motivated by intrinsic motivation, how to find purpose in life or things that you really enjoy doing. Do you have some hacks for that?
Yeah, so this is so there's many different tactics that go under those 4 big strategies. So in that first section of the book on how to master internal triggers, there's 3 big tactics, which is
Mm-hmm.
to reimagine the trigger, to see the trigger itself differently, the discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the problem I think these days is that many people believe that feeling bad is bad. That, how many books do we read with happiness in the title, and that we're supposed to constantly contented. And if you ever feel down, then something's broken with you. Somehow
Mm-hmm.
you're something's wrong with your brain. And that's ridiculous. That the base human state, we have evolved to be perpetually perturbed. That is our
Mm-hmm.
default state. If there was ever, think about it from an evolutionary perspective, right? If there was ever a group of Homo sapiens who was satisfied and happy and everything was awesome all the time, our ancestors would have killed
Yeah.
and eaten them, right? That does
Right.
not make sense on an evolutionary basis. And so the first step is to realize that feeling bad is not bad. That in fact, we can utilize these internal
Mm-hmm.
triggers like rocket fuel to move us forward. Because, what causes people to invent, to create, to cure diseases? It's all about discomfort. It's wanting, it's craving, it's
Mm-hmm.
desire. That's what pushes us forward. So that's the first step, is to learn how to reimagine the triggers, to see them differently. The next step is to reimagine our temperament, that the way we see ourselves has a profound impact on what we are capable of. And we can talk about this a little bit more. And to your question, the third step is about reimagining the task. And this is
Mm-hmm.
this is a really important one because it turns out that the way you look at the thing you are doing makes a huge impact.
Mm-hmm.
And some people think that some tasks are inherently terrible, right? They just hate doing them. And for almost every example, when you ask people, what's that thing that you procrastinate on, that you really push off, that you hate doing, that you try and avoid, that you get distracted every time you do it, you will find examples of people who love it, who just think it's
Right.
the best thing
Yeah.
ever, right? Let me give you an example. So, I have a buddy who is crazy about cars. He's a huge gearhead. He's
Mm-hmm.
constantly tweaking cars and playing with them. If you wanted me to go work on a car, I'm not a mechanic. Like, you would have to pay me money. I'm not going to get my hands all greasy and like play with that stuff. Like, give me for. That's what I would do, right? But I would never do that for fun. I have another friend who's crazy about coffee, right? He spends hours on the perfect brew and the pour time and the blend and all this stuff. I could care less. I like drinking coffee, right? But I don't want to make it unless you pay me to be a barista. Or even writing. You know, people hate writing or public speaking, things I love to do. And I would, you know, I enjoy it. It's one of my highlights of my job.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so how can that be? Are we so fundamentally different? I don't believe so. I think it's about how we look at the task. So how do we do this? How do we learn how to reimagine the task? And so for this, I talked to Ian Bogost, who's a professor at Georgia Tech, and he wrote a wonderful book called Play Anything. And he tells us that the Mary Poppins, you remember the movie Mary Poppins? The Mary Poppins advice was put a spoonful of sugar, right? A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go right. You remember that, right? He says that's terrible advice. Don't do that. Because the spoonful of sugar technique is all about extrinsic rewards, right? If I do this, I get that. And the that has nothing to do with the task itself. So a spoonful of sugar works for one-time things, right? For like something you don't have to do again and again, fine. Do it, get the reward, move on. But extrinsic rewards backfire for tasks you have to do again and again. For example, things that require creativity. That we know that when you give kids ribbons and prizes and rewards for drawing a picture, the kids who get the prizes draw worse pictures. They're less creative than the kids who do it because of an intrinsic motivation. So how do you build intrinsic motivation into a task that you don't inherently like? Bogus gives us some advice. He says, number one, study the task more intently, okay? As opposed to trying to cut the bitter taste with a spoonful of sugar so that we don't have to think about the task. He says, no, do the opposite. Get more into the task. The way people become, find ways to enjoy work they didn't previously enjoy is not by stepping away, but by leaning in, right? By understanding the different kinds of coffee and by learning about how it's grown, or by understanding the mechanics of writing and getting yourself more into the details. That's step number one. Step number two, he says, is to look for the variability. You know, in my first book, I talk a lot about variable rewards, this Skinnerian psychology of variable reinforcement, intermittent reinforcement. So what makes a slot machine engaging? What makes social media fun? What makes watching sports interesting? It's all about intermittent rewards, variability. So if you can find the uncertainty in the task, and if you can't find any, you can make some that's intrinsic to it. For example, can I work on this task for a certain period of time without distraction? Can I beat my time previously for doing that task? Can I insert some kind of uncertainty or mystery into the job? This is how we begin to find the intrinsic motivation in the task itself.
Right. So, and for you, what are things that you still procrastinate? It's it's the question that I really hate, but I'm really interested.
So here's the thing. This word indistractable is a made-up word. I made it up. It didn't exist previously. And so I get to define it any way I want because I made up the word. And so becoming indistractable doesn't never get distracted. Okay, that's impossible.
Right.
Being indistractable means that you are the kind of person who strives to do what they say they're going to do. You strive to live with personal integrity. You are the kind of person who is as honest with themselves as they are with others, right? That most people wouldn't dream of lying to someone they love, right? You wouldn't lie to your spouse, lie to your kids, lie to your friends. That would be a terrible thing to do. Most of us know that that's wrong. And yet for the vast majority of us, we lie to ourselves every day, right? And somehow that's okay. We said we were going to work out, but we didn't. We said we were going to work on that big project, but we don't. That's what I'm talking about. It's about living with personal integrity, being honest with yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that you never get distracted, right? It means that you don't continue to get distracted. So the difference between an indistractable person and a distractible person is that the distractible person continues to be distracted by the same things every day, day in, day out. There's a wonderful quote by Paulo Coelho who said, "A mistake repeated more than once is a decision." Such a good quote. A mistake repeated more than once is a decision. So if you keep getting distracted by the same thing, eventually, don't you have to stop and say, wait a minute, maybe I have to do something different. maybe I should stop blaming Facebook. Maybe I should stop blaming my iPhone and actually do something about the problem. An indistractable person says, you know what? Let me figure out why I got distracted. There are only 3 reasons. Either it's an internal trigger, an external trigger, or a planning problem. That's it. So if you get distracted once, sure, it happens. When something changes in your life and there's a new circumstance, you know, when this whole Corona crisis hit, a lot of things changed, right? And we had to adapt. And so, yeah, fool me once. You can distract me once. But if I go off plan more than once, now it's becoming a decision. So I still get distracted from time to time, but now I know why I got distracted and I take steps to prevent getting distracted from the same things.
So, and is it about being more mindful, or is it about to like notice those triggers, or what is the first step?
So the first step is mastering those internal triggers, and certainly, you know, noticing the internal triggers is a very important step. It's one small piece of the puzzle, right? This isn't meditate your problems away. This isn't, you know, just be more mindful. That stuff, I don't know, didn't work for me. It's about using these 4 strategies in unison, in concert. So of course we have to master those internal triggers and being mindful about, wait, what is that sensation? Why do I feel this urge in the first place to check Facebook or email or do whatever it is? That is not what I said I was going to do. That's certainly part of it. It's not the whole story. You also have to make time for traction. You also have to hack back the external trigger. You also have to prevent distraction with PACs. That stuff has nothing to do with mindfulness. So I would say that mindfulness is a small piece of how to become indistractable. There are some techniques that are very effective. I cite research from acceptance and commitment therapy, where what we're doing is bringing awareness to the sensation. But I think where mindfulness tends to fall flat is that you can't mindfulness all your problems away. You can't meditate all your problems away. That we have to sometimes get up off our butts and fix the source of the discomfort. Right now, where mindfulness is great and where meditation is wonderful is for those internal triggers that we can't fix. That's where that tool is great. But sometimes I get frustrated because I think there's a cohort of people who think that mindfulness and meditation is a cure for everything, and that's not the case. There are other tools we can use as well.
Okay, so and have you seen the new film on Netflix that is called Social Dilemma?
Of course, yes.
Yeah, and what do you think about the main ideas behind the film? Like that we are all sold for advertisements and those echo chambers and those the division in a society based on your beliefs and the algorithms that are just serving you what you want to hear and see.
Yeah. So there's a lot in that film. I wouldn't call it a documentary. I would call it a docu-horror. It's like calling Jaws a documentary about sharks.
Okay.
I was interviewed for that film, and I sat down with them 2 years ago in 2018 for 3 hours, and they interviewed me for the film. And they didn't include anything I had to say, nor did they include one person, not even one, that showed any other perspective. That and the film is quite dated. That, you know, the interviews were done in 2018, so nothing has been discussed of what happened in the past 2 years, and a lot has happened in the past 2 years. Many things have changed. So there are tons of distortions in the film that I don't think are accurate. But, you know, to go through that stuff I don't think does many people much good. I don't think many people care to know what's accurate in terms of the research. There are, you know, right now, my colleagues in the social sciences are, you know, all complaining about how none of us were cited in the film, no contradictory evidence, nobody telling that this is a more nuanced story whatsoever. And then in many ways that's harmful because it's very easy to paint social problems off with a scapegoat, right? Everything that's bad in the world, political division, it's all Facebook's fault. And clearly they play a role, but it's never productive to have this scapegoat and say all the world's problems, because what we're doing essentially is thinking that everybody who, you know, all these problems don't have organic causes, right? That the left hates Facebook because Donald Trump was elected, and no way anybody could have elected Donald Trump without, you know, being coerced by Facebook. It must have been Facebook, as opposed to, wait, you know what? Actually, people in the heartland of America are suffering and have some real concerns. No, it had to have been Facebook and the Russians. Kids are committing suicide. Well, why? Oh, it has to be because of Facebook, not because, kids are going through some terrible times. The environment is decaying. Economic circumstances are very difficult. None of those things matter. No. It's all about Facebook. And so we're committing the same error that every generation commits of what's called a moral panic. So anyway, that's a long way of saying there's lots of gross inaccuracies in the movie, but I'm thankful that the movie raised awareness of how we spend our time. Here's what I wish the movie would have done. One thing is to say, this is much bigger of a problem than Facebook. Because, what you said around, our attention is being sold to advertisers, as if that's a new thing. What the hell do you think television is? What do you think watching sports on TV, your attention is being sold to advertise? What do you think the newspaper business is all about? All these businesses sell your attention to advertisers. And so people think, me watching a game with my mates, that's a good thing, right? But somehow playing Fortnite or going on Facebook with your friends, that's a bad thing because the business model? No, not necessarily. Anything that wastes your time is a distraction. But only you can decide how it wastes your time. So that's, I think, the one of the problems is like, wait a minute, this isn't just a social media problem. If you stop using Facebook and now you're watching television, the average American watches 5 hours of television a night. That's not progress. You're still wasting your time doing stupid stuff that you later will regret. That's one big problem. My biggest problem with the movie, and I think this drives me crazy because it could have done so much good, is that the movie leaves people with, like, what the movie tells you to do is basically call your senator, call your congressman, call your president, call a politician to fix this problem for us. Why would we wait? Right? Are we going to sit here and say, okay, see, look, the big tech companies, they need to be regulated. And until then, I'm going to sit here and keep playing video games. That's so stupid. There are so many things, as bad as the algorithms are, as bad as the movie makes things look. Have you ever seen the movie Indiana Jones? You ever seen that movie as a kid? It's an older movie. Do you remember that movie? There's a great scene in Indiana Jones where Indiana Jones comes out into this bazaar, and there's this guy dressed in all black, and he has these 2 swords. And he takes out these swords, and he starts doing all these fancy tricks. He starts swinging them around.
I remember that. Yeah.
And what does Indiana Jones do? Exactly. He takes out his gun and he shoots the guy with 1 bullet. That's exactly what's going on. Social media is this ninja guy with these swords, and they have fancy algorithms and amazing computers and all this stuff. And you know what our bullet is? You know what our gun is? Turn off your goddamn notifications.
Right. Yeah.
You know why? Because Zuckerberg can't do anything about it. And so what are we doing complaining for 90 minutes about this terrible algorithm when we don't do anything to fix it?
Right.
And let me tell you, even if you do that, even if you take steps to stop using Facebook, if you don't understand why you get distracted, I promise you will find something else to distract you. Because you know why? People have always been distracted by one thing or another, whether it's the newspapers, the television, the comic books, the whatever. You will find, Plato dealt with this problem. And so that's, I think, the biggest error in this movie is that they make people think there's nothing they can do. And in fact, ironically, that's what the tech companies want you to believe. Yeah. Facebook wants you to believe there's nothing you can do. You know why? This is called learned helplessness. That when people believe there's nothing they can do, you know what they do? Zero. They say, there's nothing I can do. The algorithms, right? My kid won't stop playing on the computer because the algorithms, Facebook is doing it to them. Not, hey, let's have a conversation here. Not, let's see what steps we could take. Not, hey, let's, get a book from an expert and figure out this problem for ourselves. No, let's wait till the government fixes us for us. Yeah, good luck. So I think that was what pissed me off most about this movie is that there was no discussion, zero, about personal responsibility and what we can do right now.
Yeah, I have the same experience. Like 2 days ago, I arrived to south of Italy, and I started my vacation. And the first thing that I did was that I uninstalled my Facebook. So it's a second step. First step is to turn off notification, and the second is uninstall the app. And I used a tool from your book. I scheduled to use Facebook between 6 and 8 p.m., but on my laptop. So I do
Lovely.
social media, but I don't have my Facebook in my cell phone. And it's much easier not to be distracted because it's not there. So I'm only using
Right.
Instagram. I love it because you don't have that many politics there. You don't have Trump and coronavirus and Trump with coronavirus all the time. So
Yeah.
for me, it's about use those simple hacks like turn off notifications, uninstall some apps. What are more simple ideas that you can deploy on a daily basis?
You know what's great about this description that you said, you've done what humanity has always done when it comes to one of these disruptive technologies, that we adapt and we adopt. So you adapted your behavior and you adopted new technology. And this is
Hmm.
exactly what's going to happen. This movie is not going to age well because, just as you said, Facebook was nice, but now it's annoying because there's all these ads and politics and people who don't know what
Yeah,
they're talking about. I don't like it. It sucks. So you know what we
yeah,
do instead? We adapted our behavior and we adopted something better. Instagram, I think, is way better than Facebook. I love Instagram. I can
yep,
keep in touch with friends that no way I'd be in touch with.
yeah.
And then when Instagram sucks, there'll be something better.
Hmm.
Maybe it's TikTok, maybe it's the next thing after that. People will find other technologies that fix the last generation of technology. So that's exactly right. I think what you said, that we talked about mastering the internal triggers. There's lots of things that we can do there. That is the most important step for mastering all distraction. The
Hmm.
second step, I think you touched on, but I think it's worth going in a little bit more depth, is to make time for traction. Making
Hmm.
time for traction is all about turning our values into time. Now, this is a really big deal because studies find
Yep.
that almost nobody out there, very few people, except for very high performing people, keep a time box calendar. And time
Hmm.
boxing, it has been shown to be one of the most speed and most effective time management techniques you can possibly use. And this isn't something I made up. This has been around for decades. It
Yep.
uses what psychologists call making an implementation intention, which is just planning out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. So the fact that you say, look, I check Facebook from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, that's my social media time. You've turned what would otherwise be a distraction into traction by
Right.
planning time for it.
Hmm.
That's huge because here's what I want people to remember. You cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Let me say that
Hmm.
again. You can't
Right.
call something a
Yeah.
distraction unless you know what distracted you from. Because if you don't know what you want to do with your time, everything is a distraction. You're not going to write that novel in
Yeah.
your spare time unless you make time for it. You're not going to spend time with your kids or your
Hmm.
friends or doing something important and valuable unless you have the time apportioned out to do that stuff.
Hmm.
Other stuff's going to get in your way. And so that's a critical technique that I teach people exactly how to do, which is making time for traction. And so the question is, well, how do I do that? The way we do this is by asking ourselves, what are our values? Values are defined as the attributes of the person you want to become. Attributes of the
Right.
person you want to become. So what we have to ask ourselves is, how would the person I want to become spend their time? Right? So we love to talk a good game. We go, oh, I value my health. I value my friends. I value my children. Yeah, but do you have time in your calendar for those things? Or do they get whatever scraps of time are left over when you do all the other stuff in your day? So
Hmm.
making time for traction, there's a lot more to this, but I'm kind of giving you the high level overview, is incredibly important because if you don't plan your day, somebody's going to plan it for you.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I have one tool in my book, and it's all about this to make a good plan for every day. And I call it To Do Today. And it's kind of
Mm,
mind map. You set a task and you dedicate exact time for those tasks. So it's just the same as you have in your book. So it's
yeah.
funny because I read your book after I wrote my one. So, and for me, there are some other ideas that I want to
Yeah.
discuss. And my favorite questions are about your values. So, what are your intrinsic values? What are your virtues that you want to flourish on?
Yeah, so you can always tell what someone's values are not by what they say. So if I told
Hmm.
you my values, it would be meaningless because anybody can do that. Anybody can say, "Oh, my values are this, my values are
Hmm.
that." You know how you know someone's values? You look at their calendar and you look at their checkbook,
Okay,
right? How
cool.
you spend time and how you spend your
Hmm.
money tells people what your values are, not what you profess them to be, but what they actually are.
Hmm.
And so you could look at my calendar. I keep a time box calendar, and I know what's on it every single day. So in the morning, I wake up. By 7 a.m., I make breakfast with my family. We eat till 8 because we really value time with my family, and so we have phone-free breakfast almost every morning, unless something has
Perfect.
been decided in advance.
Uh-huh.
And then from 8 to 10, I check emails for 2 hours. From 10 to 12, I write. I have my writing time. And then from noon to 1, I typically eat with my family again. We have some lunchtime together. And then every Wednesday, the afternoon, I spend time with my daughter all afternoon until dinner time. And then the other days of the week, the other 4 work days, that's when I schedule my meetings. I schedule speaking engagements, consulting work. It's in those afternoon times. And we even schedule our weekends, which some people say, oh, that's crazy. That's really rigid. Why would you do that? Now, I don't schedule every second of the weekend. What I do is I schedule big blocks of time. For example, when I'm with my daughter, we might have 3 hours of time together. Now, why do we do that? So we do what's called planned spontaneities. Planned spontaneity sounds like an oxymoron. Basically, what we're doing is we're planning time to be together, but what we do during that time, we don't know. We're going to be spontaneous. So sometimes with my daughter, we'll go to a museum, we'll go to the park, we'll throw a frisbee, we'll go to the pool. I don't know. We'll find something to do. The reason we plan that time is so that I know what I will not be doing with that time. I will not be checking my cell phone. I will not be making a work call. I apportion that time so I know, hey, to live out my value of being a devoted, available father, I'm going to just be with my daughter for that time. It's booked in my calendar that I owe that time to her. And so that's part of how we conduct ourselves, because we do what we call turning our values into time.
Right. So, and you said that you are writing, so you are working on a new book, right? So
right now I'm writing a lot of blog posts. Yeah, I'm not writing a new book just yet. Yeah, a lot of blog posts. I publish pretty frequently on my blog, near and far.
And do you have any ideas for a new book? Because it's always like interesting to discuss ideas about.
No, I have a lot of ideas for a book. I haven't settled on. I'm really curious about stuff. What I love about my job is that I just get to learn for a living, which is great. And I don't write a book unless there's a problem that I can't solve for myself, either by just spending time on it with myself or with my wife. And then the third line of attack is to read books on the topic. And 99% of the time, like, somebody's written a wonderful book about the topic, and great, I find my answer in a book. Once in a while, there's a topic that I find, I read all the experts' books on the topic, and they don't fix the problem for me. And this is what happened with distraction. All the books said, oh, just get rid of your technology. But that didn't work. That didn't solve the problem for me. I would still get distracted by one thing or another. And so that's why I decided to write this book, is because none of the other books solved it for me. So when I find another problem that I can't find the solution to with the existing research out there and the existing books, then I'll probably write another book at some point.
So then it means that you are happy now, right? So
yeah, I'm not happy, but not contented.
Okay.
Right. It's good to have some dissatisfaction, to always want a little bit better in your life. How about you? Are you working on another book?
Yeah, I'm working on a new book about critical thinking, because I think that many people are lost, overwhelmed by so many information. So I'm working on a new book about kindness and critical thinking, and how to do a nice discussion on social media, because sometimes I feel that people are not discussing, but they are just fighting there. So that's my mission, to improve internet discussion. So the last question, and I ask this question to all my guests. So what do you think, what is the purpose of life? So what is your purpose in your life? How you define this topic?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I have these daily mantras that I made for myself, that just every day I look through. I have them on my phone, and I try and remind myself of these big questions. And so my purpose in life is to ask and answer interesting questions.
Perfect.
That's what I found is
I love it.
Is my purpose.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nair. It was a great pleasure. Yeah, my purpose. Yeah, my purpose is to help others to have better lives. So, and by knowledge. So it's quite similar, because there is a lot of knowledge. There are a lot of scientific studies, but what I feel is that there is a huge gap between the knowledge and between what people do in their daily life. So my mission is to transform the key knowledge into daily life. Yeah. So it's quite similar.
Perfect. Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
So
We're on a
thank you
similar
so
journey.
much. Thank you so much for an amazing interview. And I'm looking forward to see you again in New York, and this time or the next time for more than 10 minutes, because we met in New York, and it was a very short meeting because I had a ticket for Trevor Noah show, so I had to leave. And sorry for that again, and I'm looking forward to see you in person. And thank you so much for an amazing interview.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. See you next time.
So,
Bye-bye.
see you next time, and take care and survive the virus.